In 1940 in Windhoek, as Europe descended into war, two German geologists sat on a veranda listening to a radio that made their situation untenable. Hanno Martin and Herman Korn were not soldiers. They were scientists working in Namibia when German nationals began to be detained as enemy suspects. Internment was no longer a rumor. It was approaching certainty. They understood what imprisonment would mean. Not trial, not individual assessment, simply classification. By nationality, they had spent years studying desert geology, mapping canyons and seasonal riverbeds that ran dry most of the year. Now those same remote landscapes presented an alternative. If they could not remain free within the system, they would remove themselves from it entirely. The idea had once been mentioned casually. If war came, they would disappear into the Namib Desert. In 1940, the joke became a strategy. They would take only what could be justified as expedition equipment. They would drive into terrain few officials knew intimately. They would rely on knowledge rather than permission, and they would bring their dog Otto. Within 4 days, they assembled supplies. Dried food, canned goods, flour, sugar, coffee, jam, cooking gear, tarpaulin, sewing kit, first aid materials, fuel, spare parts, tools. A radio powered by the truck battery to monitor the war's progress. Firearms remained, though rifles had been confiscated. Ammunition was limited. Survival would demand precision. They chose the Kuiseb Canyon as a refuge. The Namib Desert, along Namibia's western coastline, is among the oldest deserts on Earth. Some regions are defined by towering dunes, others by rocky escarpments cut into deep canyons where isolated waterholes persist longer than surface rivers. Those rare pockets of water offered concealment and a chance at endurance. They drove by indirect routes and concealed their truck beneath an overhang at the canyon rim. Then they descended on foot along zebra trails toward the dry riverbed below. The river itself was sand, the result of a rainless year, but several isolated pools remained. That was enough to begin. The canyon floor was silent, except for wind moving across sand. The riverbed had not flowed in months, but shallow pools remained trapped between rock walls. In one of them, they saw movement. Carp. Her men waded into the muddy water and caught one by hand. It was their first meal, cooked over a small fire and eaten without ceremony. They located a rock overhang deep enough to serve as shelter. It was not a cave, but it blocked wind and midday sun. Over 2 days, they carried supplies down from the concealed truck in repeated trips. Sleeping bags were spread over flattened sand. Cooking equipment was arranged with deliberate order. The canyon was now a residence, not a passage. Rations were measured immediately. Breakfast became flour, mixed with water and a spoon of jam. The calculation was simple. Stretch preserved food as long as possible, while attempting to supplement it through fishing and hunting. The first carp proved misleading. Wire hooks, fashioned by hand, yielded mostly frogs. Hunger sharpened patience. On earlier drives into the canyon, they had noticed tracks of wild cattle, a bull, a cow, and a calf. The presence of cattle suggested both risk and opportunity. Ammunition was limited. A missed shot would not be easily replaced. Yet without meat, their supplies would decline quickly. They chose to hunt. The bull was located, grazing across the sandy floor. The plan was improvised, but methodical. Herman would circle, with Otto and the shotgun, driving the animal toward Hanno, who held the pistol. Hanno moved cautiously, but the wind shifted. The bull lifted its head, caught scent, and charged without hesitation. Hanno fired the shotgun at close range. The pellets slowed, but did not stop the animal. He scrambled onto a rocky ledge. As the bull passed beneath him, Herman fired the pistol. The bullet struck behind the ear. The bull collapsed, then surged back to its feet. Otto lunged and was thrown aside. Another shot dropped the animal again, but it rose once more. Ammunition ran dangerously low. They withdrew to retrieve rope, knives, and additional supplies. When they returned, the bull still stood weakened but alive. They secured a rope around its horns and fastened it to a tree. The final act was not efficient. It was prolonged and physically demanding. Survival replaced hesitation. That night they ate fresh meat. The next task was preservation. In desert heat, delay meant rot. They carved the carcass into strips, drying some in direct sun and smoking others over controlled fire. It was labor that consumed days. For the first time since entering the canyon, they were temporarily secure, but security required repetition. For days afterward, every meal was wild bull. Breakfast, midday, night. Protein replaced hunger, but monotony set in quickly. Their bodies adapted, but appetite dulled. Hunting had proven violent and inefficient. Several bullets had only wounded the animal before the final blow. Ammunition was too valuable for waste. Every future hunt would demand precision. Fishing was revisited. With renewed determination, tamarisk branches were bent and tied together. Strips of cloth and undergarments were stretched between them to form a crude drag net. Working side by side, they pulled it slowly through the shrinking water hole. This time, carp gathered in the fabric. Fish briefly replaced meat. The relief did not last. The water level dropped week by week. Mud thickened at the edges. The carp population thinned. Then they noticed tracks around the pond. Rounded prints and claw marks pressed into damp soil. Something else had discovered the same resource. The desert did not permit private ownership. The animal revealed itself at night through sound. Before sight, long rising calls echoed through the canyon. A hyena. It fed unseen while they slept. Hanno insisted on confronting it. Herman cautioned restraint. Shooting in darkness risked wasted ammunition. Hanno carried his sleeping bag to the pond and waited in silence. The first night yielded nothing. The second brought sound. The hyena's call rose again, closer. Hanno aimed toward movement rather than form and fired. The echo faded into a wounded cry, then silence. At dawn, he followed a drag trail across sand. The animal, unable to use its hind legs, had retreated beneath an acacia. Bullets were scarce. He used stones. The struggle was prolonged and direct. When it ended, he skinned the hyena and carried the pelt back to shelter. No celebration followed. The act had secured the pond temporarily. Nothing more. The desert adjusted but did not concede. Months accumulated. The carp pond finally dried. Meat remained their primary sustenance. A diet without variation led to consequences. Headaches intensified. Weakness surfaced without warning. They suspected deficiency but lacked diagnosis. To compensate, they drank more blood and consumed raw meat, seeking nutrients lost to heat and time. Salt deposits became as valuable as water. They moved camp when necessary, tracking both. Migration within the canyon replaced stability. The first dry season hardened them. The second began to wear them down. The second dry season stripped away whatever comfort routine had built. Water holes receded into shallow, bitter pools, salt-crusted along exposed edges, where evaporation outpaced replenishment. They moved again, carrying only what mattered. Shelter became temporary. Stability became a memory tied to the first months inside the canyon. Food required greater risk. Herds no longer lingered near predictable paths. Tracking demanded longer walks under direct sun. Otto ranged ahead, alert but leaner than before. His ribs showed faintly beneath his coat. Even the dog felt the tightening of supply. One afternoon, seeking shade beneath a rock face frequented by animals, Herman flinched and shook his hand. Had bitten him. Within minutes, his posture shifted. Sweat formed across his forehead. A rash spread unevenly across his skin. His balance faltered. Hanno saw the change immediately. Herman's speech slowed, his eyes struggled to focus. Vomiting followed, violent and sudden. Hanno searched the ground until he found the tick, swollen with darkened blood. Infection was already underway. Without hesitation, he cut into the bite and packed the wound with permanganate of potash from their supplies. It was the only antiseptic available. Herman leaned against him, nearly blind, as they reached a nearby cave. Movement had to stop. They waited through a long night, without certainty. By the following day, Herman could stand again, though weak. The incident shifted their calculations. The desert's threat was no longer only hunger or thirst. Illness could arrive without warning and without cure. They reduced unnecessary travel. Risk was measured differently now. Hunting became selective. Conservation extended beyond bullets and food to physical strength. Otto remained steady despite being gored more than once during previous hunts. His resilience mirrored theirs, but none of them were invulnerable. Time did not pause. Rain eventually returned, briefly transforming the canyon. Vegetation emerged where dust had dominated. Springbok appeared in distant numbers. Flash floods roared through narrow passages, with violent force reshaping familiar terrain overnight. The desert could change suddenly, but it never changed for them. The renewed water did not last. As quickly as it arrived, it withdrew. Pools shrank into dark circles rimmed with cracked earth. Tracks gathered at their edges. Antelope, jackal, hyena, competition sharpened. Their diet narrowed again to meat. Variety disappeared. Without plant sources, weakness crept in quietly. Headaches became frequent. Muscles cramped without warning. Herman's strength declined first. They attempted to counter the deficiency by consuming more blood and raw organ meat, drawing from what they hunted. Improvisation replaced preference. Survival did not allow refinement. Salt deposits became essential. Without them, dehydration accelerated. They trekked across blistering canyon floors to gather crusted layers from exposed rock. Each journey required calculation. The cost of movement had to equal the gain. Otto continued to accompany them on hunts, though slower now. He had been gored twice by Gemsbok in earlier encounters, yet returned each time to the routine. The dog's loyalty was practical, not sentimental. He hunted because hunger demanded it. During one of the most severe dry stretches, Hanno spotted a large lizard disappearing between rocks. He lunged, grabbing its tail before it escaped. The animal twisted violently, but he held on. The meat provided 2 meals, a small relief against ongoing scarcity. But Herman's condition worsened beyond fatigue. Pain spread from his lower back into his neck, and skull movement became difficult. Hunting was no longer possible for him. He lay inside the shelter while Hanno ranged farther alone. Feeding him raw game did not reverse the decline. The signs pointed beyond simple exhaustion. This was internal and advancing. For the first time since entering the desert, they considered leaving. The decision was not immediate. It lingered for days. To leave meant exposure, possible arrest, and abandonment of the concealment that had protected them since 1940. To stay meant watching one of them deteriorate without intervention. Eventually, the choice narrowed itself. Hanno prepared the truck concealed for years beneath rock and shadow. Fuel reserves were limited, but sufficient. The drive toward Windhoek required navigation across terrain they had avoided to remain hidden. The desert did not resist their departure. It remained, as it had always been, vast, indifferent, and unchanged. The journey back toward Windhoek was slow and exposed. After years concealed within canyon walls, open tracks felt dangerous. Each ridge crossed carried the possibility of being seen. Herman could barely sit upright. Fever came in waves. His speech thinned to fragments. Hanno drove without pause except when the engine demanded it. Windhoek did not greet them as returning explorers. They arrived as men who had evaded authority for over 2 years. Herman was taken for treatment almost immediately. Hanno waited outside hospital corridors that smelled sharply of antiseptic and confinement. Doctors identified the cause quickly: a severe vitamin B deficiency. The desert had not poisoned him. It had starved him of what it could not provide. While Herman recovered under supervision, information began to move. Friends who visited pressed for details. Questions became reports. Reports became official notice. The authorities now knew where Hanno had hidden. Otto waited beside the truck when officers arrived. The arrest was procedural, not violent. Years earlier, they might have faced internment without hearing. Now circumstances had shifted. The war's intensity had altered priorities. Still, they were detained. Charges ranged from desertion to smaller infractions, including failure to register Otto properly. The absurdity of paperwork attached to survival in the Namib did not go unnoticed, though it was never voiced openly. Their trial drew attention precisely because of what they had endured. two geologists who had vanished into the desert had returned alive after 2.5 years. Even those assigned to judge them struggled to reconcile bureaucratic violation with documented survival. Leniency followed. Fines were issued. Confinement was brief. Their case became more curiosity than condemnation. Freedom felt unfamiliar. Windhoek streets, once ordinary, now seemed crowded and compressed. Buildings rose where canyon walls once framed sky. Voices overlapped. Water came from taps without calculation. Herman regained strength gradually under medical supervision. Nutrients replaced improvisation. Color returned to his face. Hanno felt the adjustment differently. He had navigated years defined by immediate necessity. Now time extended again, beyond the next meal or water source. The structure of desert survival dissolved, replaced by civil routine. Otto moved restlessly, uncertain in town spaces. The desert had demanded everything but offered clarity. Civilization required negotiation of a different kind. Herman recovered fully, but recovery did not restore what the desert had reshaped. Silence had once been imposed by isolation. Now it lingered by choice. Conversations in town felt excessive. Questions repeated. Journalists asked the same things in different words, hoping for drama where there had only been endurance. Hanno answered carefully. He described water holes, drought cycles, and the mechanics of preserving meat in desert heat. He avoided embellishment. Survival had not been heroic in the moment. It had been incremental. Over time, their experience separated into memory and narrative. Friends wanted details of danger. They asked about charging cattle and circling hyenas. They preferred sharp edges over long stretches of monotony. Few asked about the still afternoons when nothing moved but heat. Herman tried to return to normal study and work, but the body carries records the mind cannot erase. In 1946, years after the desert had released them, Herman died in a car accident. The randomness of it felt stark against the calculated risks they had survived. Otto, who had endured goring and drought, disappeared. Some years later, no ceremony marked his absence. The desert had taken nothing violently from them. Life elsewhere did. Hanno remained in Namibia. He wrote The Sheltering Desert, documenting the 2.5 years with restraint rather than spectacle. The book did not romanticize hunger. It recorded it. It did not dramatize heat. It measured it. Readers found resilience in the pages. Hanno recognized something simpler: adaptation. The desert had not cared about nationality, ideology, or war. It had demanded water, salt, and discipline. It had tested endurance without commentary. Civilization, by contrast, interpreted. History remembers the duration. 2.5 years in the Namib Desert, hidden from war, sustained by hunted cattle, drying meat, shallow water holes, and a single functioning radio that told them when the world beyond the canyon had finally changed. But duration alone does not define survival. What endured was structure. They woke with purpose, checked water first, measured salt, inspected traps, cleaned weapons, protected flame. When drought erased one water source, they moved. When sickness struck, they improvised with what little knowledge they carried. The desert did not negotiate. It offered rare abundance after rain, then withdrew it without warning. Flash floods transformed canyons in minutes. Sand ticks nearly ended a life beneath a shaded rock. Hyenas tracked their routines. Wild cattle demanded more ammunition than they possessed. Every era had consequences. When Herman collapsed from blood poisoning, survival narrowed to a single decision, made with shaking hands. When vitamin deficiency hollowed his strength, the desert revealed its long-term cost. Leaving the canyon did not surrender. It was recognition. War had driven them outward. The desert had held them in place. In the end, biology forced the return. After fines were paid and confinement ended, the world resumed its pace. Markets reopened. Radios reported new conflicts. Otto's paws no longer pressed into canyon sand. The canyon remained. Wind moved across rock the same way it had during their first descent. Water holes filled and emptied on their own schedule. Springboks still grazed after rain. No mark on the cliffs recorded who had hidden there. The Namib had not preserved their story. It had simply allowed them to to pass through it and survive.